I currently work in communications and engagement at the Harris Center at Memorial, and my area of academic expertise is English literature. So I studied Newfoundland fiction while I was in grad school. So I'm definitely not claiming to be any sort of expert in communities of practice or the virtual world of knowledge sharing in general. However, I am currently working with the Future Skills Center on their recently launched community of practice. And as part of this work, I have spent many months reading and researching and eventually writing about communities of practice. And you'll be able to read that scan of the literature on Rick's website, possibly later today, Julia said, but more likely later this week. So we are recording today's webinar, as you just probably heard, and while the recording will only be available in English, the slides will be available afterwards in English and in French. So Julia and Connie from Rick asked me to give this webinar as an opportunity to share the knowledge that's in that document that you'll be able to find online, which I'm very happy to do. I'm also hoping today's Q&A will be, it might feel more like a conversation. So maybe we can hear from some others about their experiences using online COPs, or about any attempts anybody might have had already to build one, or any plans that you have to develop one in the very near future. Recommendations for other good reading sources are also very welcome, and I can provide some references to some journals where you might be able to publish on COPs, some knowledge that was provided to me by Stephen McGregor, and I'll of course have a list of sources of most of the people who I will be mentioning today. So there's a lot of references to different scholars in this area, and I'll be name dropping some of them, and then I'll make sure you have the references at the end of the seminar. So when I was a researcher in the English department at MUN, I had no idea whether or not other graduate students across the country were studying something similar to my topic. So the nature, of course, of a doctoral thesis is that you're producing something unique, something that hasn't really been done before, but that doesn't mean that there aren't another dozen PhD candidates looking at your topic in a slightly different way, through a different lens. So it really would have been great if I could have logged on to a particular website made for us, entered my information, and then found these people and spoke with them, talked to them about their research, their approaches, and their challenges and how they overcame them. We could have helped each other in our practice and really built a community. Academia, I'm sure a lot of you know, can be very isolated, and especially now with all of us working from home, it's a different kind of world. So these kinds of virtual communities of practice can be very beneficial. And of course, this is one of the major catalysts behind communities of practice, to bring together like-minded researchers who have a common goal and a common interest to share knowledge and grow together. So the benefits are many, but there's also some challenges, and I'll touch on some of those today. So let me change my slide for you. And everyone can still see that? I'll assume if no one stops me, then all the tech is going well. So the term community of practice, which is often abbreviated to big C, little o, big P, you can stick a little s after that to pluralize it, or a little v in front of the C to show that you're referring to a virtual community of practice. So the term was first used in 1991, so it's been around about 30 years, and it came from Etienne Wenger, who's an educational theorist, and Jean Levé, who's a cognitive anthropologist, and they brought it up in their book, Situated Learning, Legitimate Peripheral Participation. So their definition is there for you on the slide. So the first time that it was, it kind of came together like this, capital letters, the capital COP. So they defined the COP as a group of people who share a concern, a set of problems, or a passion about a topic, and who deepen their knowledge and expertise in this area by interacting on an ongoing basis. So most folks continue to define it in very similar ways. So even though we're 30 years in the future, those kind of core tenets have remained firm. And there's a generalized term for you there that I've just put together that shows you kind of the construction of it from a bunch of different theorists' definitions. And I have some more here for you. So the definitions don't really vary a whole lot, but you can really start to get a feel for what the main elements are. So for example, for researchers Kimball, Hildreth, and Wright in 2000, so about 9 years after Wenger and Levé, they said that a COP is a group of people who share a concern or a passion for something they do, or who learn how to do it better as they interact regularly. So you can see this concern, passion, And of course, always this constant regular interaction, communication, and all of it developing the practice. Brown in 2003, they said that they view a COP as a group of people with different functions and viewpoints, so not having to be exactly the same, but committed to joint work over a significant period of time, during which they solve problems, learn, and develop a way of reading mutually. So the community should produce something. It should actually have outputs. It should have specific functions. They should solve problems and produce things. And then Hernandez and Campos in 2011, so it's one of the more recent definitions. There hasn't actually, and I think I'm right in saying this, through my scan of the literature, but there hasn't been a lot published on this topic in the last few years. Most of it does seem to have come out in the early 2000s, very early 2010s. So Hernandez and Campos in 2011, they say that a COP is an important mechanism through which individual, organizational, and social knowledge is held, transferred, and created. So from all of these definitions, you can get a feel for what Wenger said 30 years ago, and many still agree is true, are the three core features. So we have the domain, the community, and practice. And you can actually find a lot more about this and about communities of practice in general in a very accessible format on Wenger's website. So if you Google his name, you'll find it. I think his website is just called Introduction to Communities of Practice, and you can get some really helpful introductory style information there. So researchers are quick to point out that all communities are not communities of practice. So a neighborhood, for example, your neighborhood could colloquially be referred to as a community, but it wouldn't be a community of practice because it doesn't satisfy all three of these features. It might satisfy one or two, but you need all three in order to be a COP. So we have the domain. The domain is the specified sphere of activity or knowledge. So members are brought together by a learning need that they share. A community of practice isn't just a club of friends or a network of connections. It must have an identity defined by the shared domain of interest. So this membership implies a commitment to the domain. It's of the utmost importance, and therefore a shared competence is also inherent in this, and in that it distinguishes the people in this group from people in other groups. This is something people have expertise in, great knowledge in, and it's brought them together. And then secondly, of course, we have the bringing together, we have the community. So you don't want it to be disparate, you want people to be interacting. So once the collective learning becomes a bond, then you have the community of people. So while they're pursuing their interest in their domain, members will engage in activities, discussions with each other, they'll help each other, and they'll share information. So this, we actually have a building of relationships, and the building of relationships is very important. You don't want to just visit a website that other practitioners, like-minded practitioners visit. You want to actually interact and engage with them. So it needs to be active and it needs to be connected in that way. So, having the same job title doesn't mean you're automatically part of a COP, right? You need to actually interact with each other. Wenger gives the example of students in American high schools. So he says they might have a lot in common, but unless they're actually interacting and learning together, actually talking to each other across the different schools, then they're not a community of practice. But of course, it is important to know that this doesn't have to be a daily thing. It's not meant to be prescriptive or rigorous, something you log into every morning, unless you want to, but a regular kind of attempt at communication would be enough to satisfy the second quality. And then of course, the third necessary element is the practice. So you can have a domain and you can have a community, but then you really just kind of have a Facebook page where maybe people who love the same breed of dog goes to share their love, or a Reddit forum where people share fan theories about certain movies. We're familiar with these kinds of community domains, but it's not quite a community of practice until they start to produce something. So they're actually practicing. They're actively publishing, they're actively having conferences, things like that. Not just talking to each other, but with these kinds of outputs. So they're always practitioners. Practitioners are the people who take part in COPs. So it all definitely takes time and sustained interaction. This webinar itself, we're satisfying a bunch of these qualities in certain ways, but it isn't a COP, partly because it doesn't have the kind of sustained over time feature that is required. So these are all familiar things. These are all things that COPs have in common, the things that link them, but there are a lot of variations. So, I mean, you know, beyond really sharing these kind of three core things, besides having a domain, a community, and a practice, a COP could be almost anything, right? It can appear in very different ways from each other. So most of the research that I read did focus on virtual COPs because they do seem to be the most popular, especially in the last 10 years, and especially in our current environment. You know, these are the way to go going forward when we're being prevented from getting together in person. And a lot of research has said, you know, this is one of the beautiful things of the virtual COP is that it kind of resists problems of time and geography. It lets us connect with people we wouldn't normally connect with because we are distanced by space or time zones or anything like that. So most of what I talk about does refer to COPs in general, especially, you know, some of the writing back in the early 90s, although I refer mostly to the later publications. But I will come back and focus in on virtual COPs in a moment. So some of the things I've included here on the slide are size, geography, exclusivity, funding, specific goals. These are all very important things for organizers to consider when they're starting their own COP, and there are ways that they can differ. So while some COPs can be very small, others are very large. You know, they might have a core group and then many peripheral members. There is a consensus among researchers that the ideal size for a COP varies from 50 to 80. But this isn't to say that a group of 10 or a group of 200 couldn't work. You know, there might be more challenges inherent in that kind of large size, or you might feel like the output or the community building isn't quite as effective with a smaller group, but it can vary around that kind of preferred ideal size. So some communities of practice are local. You might just have, you know, a Newfoundland group of researchers who are focused on the same thing, meeting weekly to produce something, but some cover the entire globe. Some can be found within a single organization, I'm assuming a very large organization that wants to bring together their employees. So you'll see a lot of writing on that, a lot of writing on COPs for business and how it's a great way to bring employees together and increase productivity. And some, of course, include members from various organizations, so not within the same organization. Some are formally recognized. They might be supported with a very large budget, maybe some federal funding. There might be membership fees. Others are going to be volunteer-led and operate with very little financial support. That doesn't mean it's not a COP. It just means it's taking on a different format. So none of the differences are going to detract from the community of practices satisfying of the three main features. So there's a lot of room for variation within this topic. So the example for me, of course, today that I will just briefly mention, and you can ask me more about it later, is, of course, the Future Skills Center Community of Practice. So this COP just launched a few weeks ago, and it's powered by Magnet out of York. So this COP wants to bring together skills researchers from across Canada. So anybody who researches skills, future of work, and so on, anyone who works in that field or different organizations. So you've got the university researchers, the NGOs, the government programs, and so on, all coming together to learn and create a community and improve this domain of practice in the country. So they've got, you know, places for you to publish your own profile, for you to connect with other members. There's forums, direct messaging, there's news widgets, social media is embedded. It's a very kind of active website that you can use, or that one can use, someone whose domain is shared in that way to, you know, to further their own practice. All right, so some challenges. We'll talk about the challenges first, then we'll get into the benefits. So, I mean, with any initiative, right, there's going to be certain challenges associated with the development and the maintenance. So researchers Hernandez and Campos, who I mentioned earlier, they're writing about 9 years ago. They have argued, and I've got these listed for us, that COPs can hoard knowledge, they can actually limit innovation, they can close off new members and experiences, and they can reflect society's injustices and prejudices. And so, you know, you can see I have listed here as well, how I consider it is, you know, computer error and human error, right? So problems with the technology, with the actual platform itself, the mechanism, and then problems, of course, with humans, because we are human and there will be problems that will come up. So for various reasons, the community might not work. The design might not be focused on an evolution. It might grow stagnant. There might not be much room to grow. It might come out and have a big splash, but then nobody changes it, nobody updates it. There's nothing going on that actually makes it feel like a living space. A very important concern for most researchers is that a COP might not invite different dialogue levels. So perhaps people join, they reach out to folks, nobody replies to their messages, right? They post a question on a forum, nobody responds to their question. So this is difficult, right? And it's a difficult thing to manage. How do you force people to interact with each other and communicate? And of course, the experts, the researchers will stress having leaders, having moderators, organizers who are active on the site and that pop in and try to encourage this kind of activity. And we'll talk more about them in a minute. You want to make sure that you have this dialogue happening. Community practice might not be focused on creating value. There may be no rhythm of work, no patterns that become familiar. Maybe there's a scattered kind of event or the scattered publication of a news article, but there's nothing that members can really rely on that keeps them coming back to check for updates. It can be very helpful to have the community on a schedule. So many of these challenges, like I said, have to do with the general setup of the COP, how it looks, how intuitive it is. Is the tech easy to maneuver? Does it take a lot of time? Does it require a lot of attention? How the platform and the technology are either helping or detracting. And so then we have the second group of challenges, as Hernandez and Campos classify them. So here we have the human weaknesses. So there could be implicit problems that can entail the development of some serious disarray within the group. We're gonna, possibly have some jealousy, imperialism, narcissism, ostracism, dependencies, stratifications. Maybe there's too much distance between the core group and the rest of the group. Maybe some feel like they're not getting much attention, but certain individuals are controlling the group. The same kind of things you find within organizations, within, academia, within universities. It can all, of course, be transferred over into the COP. And of course, the lack of connection, and that's what this is all about. It's a community of practice. You need that connection, and if you don't have it, if people don't feel comfortable, if they don't have trust, if they don't have dialogue, then you're not really going to get the community working in the way that you want it to work. My boss always likes to say that we need to bring our humanity to our work, and COPs are no different. Even though it's virtual, and this can be difficult because you're looking at names and pictures, you're not really seeing the person in front of you. So it's very important to remember that there are people who need help, and there's people that would like to talk to you. So just making sure everyone feels included and active. And it's also important to recognize that COPs do not yield immediate results. So this is stressed by a lot of the researchers in the items that I've read. It's not, you launch the page, a couple hundred people join right away, and then great, you have this really active developed COP. You're going to see articles being published from people who've just met each other, or you're going to see weekly webinars popping up with people within this group. It's going to take time. Developing the connection is going to take time. Coming up with schedules will take time. So it is a long-term investment. And so because of this, researchers do stress that patience is key when starting or opening a new COP. So that can be one of the challenges to get over. So back to management. This is something that's repeated again and again in the literature. They really stress that there should be moderators, there should be organizers, and these people should be very clearly marked as such in the group. So when you log in, you should see a picture of someone and their name, their contact information, who they are, what they do. You should feel comfortable enough to send them a direct message, and they should feel comfortable, and they should be, ready and willing to respond to you right away to make you feel included. So their primary focus should be on removing barriers to participation and communication wherever possible. So, this could mean, hopefully these things won't happen, but, maybe sometimes jumping in to remove the negative comments or trying to ease some sort of conflict. The moderator should be active in this kind of way. So some other general issues that often come up that can surround a COP include employees being financially rather than intrinsically motivated to contribute. So if they don't see certain benefits very clearly, being made available to them through the COP, they might give up on it. There could be rigid bureaucratic structures hampering knowledge sharing. There is a lot of complicated legalese around, what journals allowing you to publish your article where and when, the embargo dates and all this. That could get a bit complicated for people. And then the knowledge is power paradigm. So people might feel discouraged from sharing what they know in a casual way because they want to own that knowledge and they want to publish it. And they want to make sure that their name is attached to it. So different things can prevent people from sharing in the ways that you might, in the ways that are necessary, the ways that will really make the community most beneficial. So that seems like a lot of negative information, but we'll just get that out of the way because there are so many benefits, so many positive discoveries have come from a lot of case studies that have looked at different forms of COPs. And if you look at the document that will be posted on Rick's website, you'll see organized by topic, annotated type of bibliography. And you'll see there's case studies from Hong Kong, from businesses, from elementary schools. A lot of people have implemented COPs in these different places, and they've looked at what's happened, and the core of it has been positive. So the benefits coming out of it have been really overt and long-lasting. So some scholars argue that the key benefit, so the number one reason to set up a COP is to connect people in dynamic and lively conversations. And especially in the context of solving real problems. So if there's a problem, let's get these people together and we'll solve it. Others view the COP as just the ultimate networking tool. So this is the tool you need. This is the tool every organization needs, or every group of organizations need to actually get people together, right? To actually cross any geographical or time zone barriers to help grow one's professional network. So already, I mean, that's, connecting people, growing networks, these are some very clear benefits. Researcher Ali in 2000 provided a fairly comprehensive list of the COPs, and I've provided these on the slide for us. I think his was kind of mostly revolving around a business or a certain kind of organization like a business. So the language might not always exactly fit, but I think it does start to really, point out for us the areas where a community like this can be very beneficial. So it can help develop a common language or methods and models around specific competencies. So this is actually really important. People can become familiar with certain types of jargon or slang that might relate to the domain. You hear a lot about implicit norms when you do this kind of research on the COP. There are these norms that folks maybe outside of the community are familiar with, and becoming a part of the community will introduce them to this. So it's a really kind of great introduction to not other people, but to the domain itself. It furthers their specific knowledge in the domain. So it can extend knowledge and know-how to diverse people. So we're not just keeping it limited to, the ivory tower idea of the university, having all of the knowledge, it's being shared. They can help retain knowledge when there are individuals who leave a certain field organization. So nothing's lost, right? It can work as a repository. And the Future Skills Center COP is like this in that they have an area where publications are posted. So it's actually collecting relevant work for researchers to come in and find it in one very convenient space. They increase access to knowledge. So instead of dragging yourself to the library, something again, which is very difficult these days, the knowledge is there in the form of people and in the form of documentation. They can allow for the sharing of power and influence. So again, kind of going back to this idea of not just certain individuals having all of the power or having, the popular name, but everybody getting a chance to actually work at the same level. They actually help people carry out their work. They provide a stable sense of community. They promote a sense of identity. A lot of experts actually really stressed how this is very beneficial at a very personal kind of identity building level. So to actually be able to do this kind of work was very, in the studies that I read, it was very satisfying for people to be able to join this group and build their sense of individual identity. And it helps people with personal challenges and opportunities. So, I mean, we can't, ignore things like disability or access, finances, funding. Most COPs are free websites, at their core. So it's something that's very accessible to people. They can use it in their homes. They don't need to go out into a building, or they don't need to fly across the country to a conference. So all those kinds of very practical reasons make it very beneficial. And it's important to remember that COPs are self-organizing systems. So they're based on the intrinsic value that membership brings, or at least at their best case scenario they are. And this is really important. No one's being forced to be a part of this, and that can make a difference. A lot of the studies emphasize that people want to take part in this. They want to be there. There's no pressure to be there, and that makes them want to be there more. So it's a kind of positive cycle of experience and output coming together just for people to actually, achieve and kind of relearn the greatest parts of the research, why they got started in the first place. So researcher Hauer, just a few years ago in 2014, he compared the COP to the old school office water cooler. So he said that's how we can think about it. So they're a place to see who's doing what right now in a casual, relaxed manner, and to immediately find some expertise, immediately to walk up there, to log into your virtual COP and to find somebody very casually, not needing to put out a call for expressions of interest or answer a call for funding, but to just, make these connections right away and help you spot opportunities and share opportunities and improve collaboration. So advice or best practice. A lot of this starts to layer, and you'll start to see the challenges and the benefits kind of working together in the recommendations that are given to you from a lot of the experts. So I've pulled out a few for us to think about. Hauer, again, 2014, he has a book, the title will be listed in the sources, and he goes through a lot of detail about, this is what you need to do to start your COP. So that's probably the text. It's very accessible, very kind of casual language and directions for those who want to start something up. So they give us, it's him and his two co-authors, they give us some tips on how to get this going. So marketing these days is very important. And I guess, of course, it is these days with everything. You need to promote yourself and get the information out there. So they offer different advice as to how to do this. They say, of course, you need to develop your plan. And they suggest integrating marketing materials into existing training programs and making use of existing organization publications and distribution channels to reach the widest possible audience. So find those listservs, find those partner websites, find folks who are willing to help you promote this, right? And this, of course, comes after having that plan, having the attractive promotional materials that you can distribute. And they emphasize that a healthy community will have a mixture of seasoned experts and new learners. So they make sure, get into the schools, find the grad students, advertise on social media, all the ways that you can in order to not just reach the people that you know. You don't want to just have the community be people you already know, but find those people that are just entering this field, right? So the second area they talk about a lot is support and integration, so just kind of the maintaining of the COP, and they give a lot of advice on this. And of course, as we heard in the challenges, they warn that many communities fail because of poor support. So organizers setting it up and then kind of having other things to worry about, other things that distract them, so they don't actually give the site the maintenance and the moderation that it really requires. So they say governance, infrastructure, and facilitation are of the utmost importance. To make sure that you are enabling the kind of knowledge transfer that a COP should provide and encouraging the growth of it. And of course, it should be easy to use, it should be intuitive, and the benefits should be obvious to all. And this, of course, leads us into the next one, which is leadership. So this is stressed again and again. Make sure the organizers and moderators are being educated, that they know how to interact with people. Leadership training would not be frowned upon. There should always be somebody that can be reached for help and that can provide help in a timely manner. Norms need to be reinforced so nobody ever gets confused, and so on and so forth. So just making sure that you're marketing it, that it's being supported, that it's being integrated into the community, and that the leadership is a very strong presence throughout. So just a few comments on virtual COPs, although of course everything I've been talking about does apply to the community of practice online. And I mean, technology is such a great support for the COP. The right kind of technology is so easy to be shared. It's so easy to create awareness. It can provide an accessible repository, and I mean, so on and so forth. I'm sure we know the benefits of technology in communications. So researchers Page and Wentling offer 2 questions, and this is in the bottom right of the slide, to consider when managing a virtual COP. So they ask, what are the barriers to individuals contributing their knowledge? What are the barriers preventing them from using the COPs as a source of new knowledge? And then how can these barriers be overcome? So always asking, what are the problems? Can we see any problems? Can we see any restrictions? How can we overcome them? So for example, they list some of the barriers that people might feel when approached with joining a COP. There might be a fear of posting something irrelevant. They don't want to post something that others won't find interesting. They don't want to post something inaccurate. They don't want someone to, even gently attack them for posting something that might be have a falsehood in it. They don't want to feel intimidated, and they may fear criticism. So these are some of the things that can prevent people from joining and becoming active, especially newcomers, new learners, new researchers in this kind of forum. So they answer their own question, and they state much of what we've already gone over. What's needed is a set of norms, promoting institution-based trust and clearly communicated standards for knowledge sharing. And again, this is with the focus on the virtual world. So they say there should be norms that are clearly stated. There are steps. There's a sequence to how you would join the forum and how you would interact. So the more somebody is joining this community of practice, the more likely they are to know what to do and to do it. If they join and it doesn't feel like there's enough direction, they're not sure where they should begin, then they likely won't begin because of all the reasons, the barriers listed before. They need to make sure that the creators of the COP need to make sure that it's very clear. The communication standards are very clear for anybody who wants to join this community. So in order to facilitate dialogue, which is again and again emphasized as the most important part of a COP, norms, leadership, and just a very clear and intuitive platform are of the utmost importance for a virtual community of practice. Okay, so to reiterate and conclude, these get brought up a lot. These are again from Wanger, who's kind of the main figure with all of this, A.T. Wanger. He's the guy you might remember created the term back in '91, along with his partner. He and his wife publish a lot now on their website. But their 7 principles for cultivating communities of practice are referenced very frequently. And these, I think, really summarize nicely the challenges, benefits, and advice for best practice for real life and virtual COPs that I've already mentioned. So we'll look at these and then we can, I've seen the chat flashing up now and then, so we can see if there's any questions you might have or anything else we can talk about. So you want to design the community to evolve naturally, create opportunities for open dialogue within and with outside perspectives, welcome and allow different levels of participation, develop both public and private community spaces, focus on the value of the community, combine familiarity and excitement, and find and nurture a regular rhythm for the community. All right, Julia, I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Mandy. That was an excellent overview. Definitely, I think, gave us all some really great insight into community practice. And I know we all live in this virtual world now, so I think community practice is really essential to, help us with this virtual collaboration. So we've had a few questions pop up. I'm going to start with, I'm going to give the mic over to one participant who had 2 questions.
Hi, can you hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you perfectly.
Oh, thank you so much for the presentation. It was excellent. So my first question was with the, members coming and going, should you set limits to who can, like not to who can access, but a start and an end to a community of practice, if you understand what I'm saying? because when it was a couple of years ago that we established a community of practice for graduate students, and one of the complaints was that members came, some new people came, and it was hard to establish a relationship because people were coming and going. So we are planning to establish a new COPE, and we were wondering if we should have deadlines for members to join a community of practice. I just need some, recommendations or advice. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. And I know what you're saying. I like deadlines. I'm planning, or I'm helping plan a conference right now. Sent out many emails with very firm deadlines, and they're told that after this deadline they cannot take part in the conference. And yeah, sometimes I feel like that approach works. But I feel like the experts with COPs would say no. They would say keep it open, and that's what you'll need to do, is to really just keep the community so active that people will want to come back. I can see maybe maybe organizing a certain kind of launch, something that will attract a lot of people to come at the start date when you want them there. But in terms of keeping them there, I think that will come down to maybe implementing some kind of schedule, maybe having enough within the community that people feel like they don't want to leave because they'll miss something. It is a very tricky thing, because a lot of people are excited at first and then they quickly lose interest. But if you look into some of these, I'm sure Howard, Preview, and Levy, they're the Successful Corporate Learning Tweak Book 07. I don't really understand the title of their book, but they do have a lot of, I would direct you towards that one, because I would think they would probably have a lot of tricks and tips to kind of guide you with that.
Thank you very much.
Anyone else too? I'm sure Julia can let anybody else speak if they've also experienced this. The COP we just started is just started, so we're not really to this kind of seeing how we can maintain interest. We're just kind of getting people in. But if somebody else has something, an experience they'd like to share, then that would be great too.
Okay.
I'm just going to reiterate, or David, maybe I can let you speak as well, but you had a great point here about your own experience with COPs.
Thank you, Julie. Julia, I guess. My second question is about the outcome that you talked about. So do you need to measure that outcome? Like, how do you know that there's an outcome? If you are establishing a community of practice, you're bringing people together, they're sharing their knowledge, they are telling you that it's helping them, let's say with their assignments, or they just feel, it's helping their mental health, just say that to you. Is that an outcome, or you need to measure that outcome using a survey or something? Like that output part or outcome part of it confused me a little bit.
Yeah, no, I think you've got it exactly. I would say those to me would be the outcomes I would be looking for. And you could certainly build in a survey. And this is something experts do sometimes recommend, getting official feedback, even checking in with all the members of the community, maybe every so often, just to see how they feel about it. Everyone often does appreciate being asked their opinions on things like this. And there's so many platforms that are built for the use of very quick surveys that you could embed in the community of practice. But I think really word of mouth, anecdotes, any feedback you hear, these would be the outcomes you would want to hear. To me, that would be powerful enough evidence that the COP is working. If they do come to you and say, this has been very helpful, I've met someone and we're working on an article. And of course, if you do build in a repository of publications, that's something else you can refer to if you need to. But I think for your, for your own purposes, it's really whatever you would measure, whatever you've come up with for the measures of success. So I wouldn't worry too much about the outcomes, because those would be specific to the COP. And if your outcome is just that it's fostering a really welcoming kind of environment for grad students to come together, which I know I would have appreciated when I was in grad school, then I think that's a perfect outcome.
Julia, can I ask one last question?
Yes, for sure. Go ahead.
Okay, in terms of research, we did that evaluation at the end of our COPE, and we had positive feedback, and then we interviewed 8 of the members, and we produced a manuscript, but we are having difficulties publishing the manuscript because it seems like, oh, you know what, there is a lot of information about the benefits of COPE, and this is not adding anything to the literature. So I just want some advice or recommendations from you in terms of research, if like which direction or what kind of research can you do in the future? Like how can you add to this community of practice domain, if you will?
Yeah, and that is too bad. It's too bad that you're being turned down, because for me, I would think finding a beneficial case study, somebody outlining the benefits or the positive outcomes of their COP would be a great thing to have published. I know I do have a list of journals for publishing that was provided to me by Stephen McGregor, and I'm very happy to share that with you. I'll copy it over into the chat now, actually.
Oh, thank you.
So again, I haven't actually tried to publish on this. My level of expertise for publishing would be in, studies in Canadian literature and those kinds of English literature journals, which is a completely different thing and wouldn't be very helpful for you. But these were recommended to me as places where they would, or journals that would be interested, that would be interested in this kind of work, so that there's an opportunity, I think, in some of these places. So it's somewhere to start, even just to give these editors a shout, to send them an email and say, this is something we have put together and we think it could be beneficial. I know Journal of Knowledge Management is where I did find a number of the articles that I've read and that I cite in the literature scan. So that could be something. I'm not sure if anybody else has any recommendations.
That's perfect. Thank you, Mandy and Julia. Thank you very, very much. It's been very helpful.
Great, and good luck with the
Yeah, thank you.
So I'm now going to turn the mic over to Erica, who had a question, and David Phipps as well. If you wanted to add to your useful comment that you added as well, it can be followed up by Erica.
Hey there, David, do you want to go first?
I'm okay, Erica, waiting until you've asked your question.
Okay, thanks. Well, thank you so much for that presentation. That was really helpful and informative and fabulous. So my original question in the beginning when you were talking about the components of a community of practice was how you differentiate between a community of practice and a working group. I was interested in your kind of focus on the community should be working toward a shared purpose, and I was just trying to think about how you articulate that purpose and how you maintain focus on that purpose and whether that's different in those two contexts.
Yeah, I mean, I would probably say that there's not much difference between a working group and a COP, except it's, it's got this this name attached to it that might be familiar to some people, and it might attract people. So knowing that it's officially a community of practice might seem attractive to some people. Just knowing what a community of practice is and then what it entails. But I think, like I was saying before, the outcomes, in terms of specific problems that need solving, that's all very broad, or that can be, there doesn't need to be a particular, one kind of focus, and then there could be, I'm sure there are case studies of COPs that have been put together for the sake of one particular issue. But most of the research does seem to generalize it as groups where a number of people can come together with a number of different problems, and then hopefully they can find partners and they can communicate with others who've had similar problems. And, it really focuses on individual kind of growth and group growth. So I guess the overall outcome would be that somebody can solve their own specific problem that they came to the COP for help with, but then at the same time, then they contribute to the group in their own way. So I'm not sure if I'm answering your question or talking in circles,
You are. That's
but
really
I
helpful.
think really the COP does, yeah, it really is a working group, right? And I think it's up to the organizers when they contribute, you know, to the overall organization of the group, whether or not they want it to be specifically directed or whether or not they want it to be more open. So it can be quite varied. And, you know, the definitions are useful and interesting, but really it comes down to whatever the organizer wants to focus on.
Thank you. That's great.
Julia, do you want me to make my comment?
Yes, please go ahead, David.
Okay, so thank you very much. I spent quite a bit of time in sort of playing with COPs, and my experience is that community practice mirrors what we read as the 1-9-90 rule of social media, whereas 1% of people on social media, and in my opinion, communities of practice, are the creators of content. 9% are the amplifiers, they're the people that are commenting or reposting content, and 90% of us are lurkers. We're consuming the content. And I think it's those the 1% creators and the 9% amplifiers that really need a lot of nurturing to keep the community of practice fresh and providing content to the 90% of us who are lurking. So I'm just wondering, Mandy, and thank you for all of the research that you've done. Have you bumped into any of this about how there are these different categories of COP participants and how we may need to nurture some of them in different ways?
Yeah, so I've never heard the 1-9-90. I think that's wonderful. Not a lot. So the research doesn't really seem, I mean, you know, you can find a lot of the challenges listed in the research. No one's shying away from that, but there might be a little bit of a, you know, pie in the sky kind of, this is one happy group and the group comes together and maybe some people aren't comfortable and some people are fearful, but overall it's one big community. I know there was somewhere that they did talk about being careful that there wasn't a core group and then the peripheral members, like you said, the lurkers. Yeah. So there's some awareness of this. You know, whether or not awareness is helpful, I guess it's the first step to trying to break it apart. But like you said, it really came down to all the experts recommended just making sure that there is somebody moderating that pulls people in. You know, I guess kind of like a teacher, like I'm calling on my students and I'm trying to bring them into the conversation. That seems to be the biggest piece of advice out there, is having the trained leaders who can moderate and who can facilitate the conversation in order to try to get away from this core group peripheral breakdown, right? And it's difficult. That is
even recognizing those 90% lurkers, yeah, they're really important, right? They're the people that are consuming and benefiting from the content. But how you get to them, how you know, they're active, but they're not visible. And so it's hard to evaluate that group.
Yeah. And there might be some, interesting ways there in making people visible somehow. I don't know if there's some interesting platforms to use, even video chatting, I guess, in a quite a literal way of making people visible. Yeah, I'm sure there's.
So I did post a couple things in the chat. One is just draw people's attention to the ktecop.ca, which is Knowledge Transfer and Exchange Community of Practice. That is really just a website that people contribute to. It's used mostly now for knowledge K&B type jobs. They are posted there. But then also some literature from a long-standing knowledge mobilization group at the University of Brighton who have built on the community practice model and published it with the Wenger. So just those, sorry, something fell in my backyard. I have to go now and determine if there's anything nasty in my backyard. Sorry, something just made a lot of noise. Thanks, Mandy. I got to run to check it out.
Thanks, David.
Great. So I will leave this open for another minute or two. Does anybody else have any more comments or feedback for Mandy? Erica just posted the question, best platforms.
Yeah, I was just wondering.
Platforms, yeah, I know. Yeah, there are so many platforms. I know with the Harris Center now, we're starting a new initiative And we've been looking at things like, I think it's Engage 76 and Bang the Table. So more kinds of really comprehensive platforms. Of course, Magnet is the platform powering the Future Skills Center, COP. Yeah, I think a good Google, Erica, would be your best bet there, because the technology is just constantly coming out with new things.
So there was one comment in the comment board asking, can we stay in touch with Mandy after the webinar if we have questions? So Mandy,
Yeah,
not sure if you feel comfortable
absolutely.
sharing your contact info. Awesome.
You can find it on the Harris Center website as well.
Great.
It's everywhere.
Great. So if there's no more comments or questions, I just wanted to thank Mandy so much for her time today, for speaking with us about this really interesting topic. And like she mentioned, we'll have the slides posted in English and French on the RIC website, as well as the recording from today's webinar. And at the end of the week, we're hoping to have Mandy's full paper that she wrote about the literature review will also be posted on the RIC website, as well as a summarized version of it. So my plan is that hopefully we can share out these links to everybody who attended the webinar today, so you can all access them afterwards. So thank you so much, Mandy. Appreciate your time, and hope everybody has a lovely afternoon.
You too. Thanks, everyone.